Hi, my name is John Biddle.
And my name is Sam Biddle.
And welcome to our podcast extension. Minisode.
But this is...
Connected to the Criminal Club.
Oh, very complicated.
Anyway.
So, this is a minisode episode of part of I Hate This Book podcast about a true crimes criminal. But Albert Fish is the first criminal, or one of the criminals, that is featured in the Criminal Club.
The Criminal Club, which is a subscription-only service, which costs £1.99 sterling.
A month.
And then you get a short story, book. And it's not just the research, but what I've done is I've created a fictional story that goes along with the research and a separate YouTube video that I do.
Yeah, so we do, you do a sort of, you read the research.
Yep.
But this really is us discussing
about the
Albert
killer
Fish.
The killer in question. In this week we'll talk about Albert Fish, but we just dissect a bit of the psychopathy and the behaviour traits and all that sort of stuff from what we know from our own therapy.
Yeah, like why the fuck would you do it? So and we're going to talk about Albert Fish today.
Albert Fish, the Brooklyn vampire, the original bogeyman.
Okay.
And he's and this is all turn of the century stuff. Not 2000. We're talking 1900. So this guy was born in like the late 1800s, and he basically just ran amok because the police couldn't really catch him because there was no such thing as forensics or sort of sharing data between police forces.
Can't imagine there not being. I mean, I've been watching some true crime stuff on Netflix and Prime, and so, going back to the 70s or the 50s where there was no DNA or just being so fortunate that we've got all of that here now.
There's a killer that I'm doing. I think it's month 7, but I'm just finalising all the details on that. There's a guy called Carl Panzeram who filled the void after Albert Fish was arrested. This is a guy that literally went from state to state and just changed his name.
Can you imagine doing that now?
Well, you couldn't.
No.
Absolutely couldn't.
I mean, CCTV would, face recognition. I mean, the whole conspiracy theorists, nowadays you can understand that because you cannot leave your house without somebody knowing.
No.
If they wanted to track you, you're tracked.
Yeah. Completely. They can even tap into your car.
Huh?
Yeah, because you've got Wi-Fi. If they've got a signal on that, they can burrow into that.
So in a way, it's a little, makes you feel safe because there's nothing. I'm not doing anything wrong.
If you've got nothing to hide, the price of freedom, there is a price to pay for the freedom that we enjoy in the West. And what happens behind the scenes is that we have no idea what happens behind the scenes. And unfortunately, we are somewhere along the line and we've got to pay the ferryman for that freedom. And if that means you've got to have an ID card, or every street corner in London, which there is high definition CCTV cameras. You can't do anything without being monitored.
But on the other side of the coin, if somebody wanted to frame you, somebody clever with a keyboard.
Who's that film we watched? And that happened.
With what's her name? The woman.
They docked the video. Can you remember?
Oh, hold on, wait. Is this a true crime thing? Or
No, it was
Julia Roberts.
It might have been Julia Roberts, where they changed the video. No, it was a BBC drama. It was that soldier that had come home on leave, and what they wanted to do was use this video for political reasons, but it went completely wrong because the guy went completely unhinged, and he was there with a bomb vest on and everything. It just completely escalated. But what they had originally done is they got the CCTV image. I can't remember what happened, but they doctored it in a way that it looked like he killed her, and he hadn't killed her. Somebody else had killed her. But they wanted him as the patsy. They wanted him as the...
Who's they?
Oh, I can't remember. You're asking me. I can't remember. If you can't remember it, I can't remember it.
Well...
But anyway, they
That's the
doctored
problem, though,
they
isn't it?
doctored the footage.
I mean, we've got, you know, in a way, we live in Dorset, and you've got this sort of element of anonymity because we're like, who wants anything to do with us, really?
Mm.
But even so, there is all of that possibility. So we may well be safe, but we are also at risk because.
Completely.
But you know, I do count my blessings that we are actually, you know, at some point, if I was to be murdered by my husband, you would get caught.
Most likely.
I hope so.
Most
You're not
likely.
going to murder me, though. So, and it also means I'm never going to murder you. Cause...
Listen, if there is a priority of order, you are very, 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 very low on that order. In fact, you're not even on the list.
What? For murder?
Of people I'd rather kill first. There's quite a few people on that list, and so yeah, definitely.
I do have a kill list. That sounds bad. This is actually on YouTube.
No, I don't.
No. We'll rewind that. Maybe delete that bit. Do you have a list of? Because I don't.
I work in the NHS.
What is that? Oh yeah, so that means no. I don't have I wouldn't. I think you know what? Karma is my friend. Like, karma really is on my side, and it comes back.
I live by the same rule, which is why I haven't killed these people in the NHS. It's because karma is a wonderful thing.
I think karma causes more damage than you could ever.
Agreed. I totally agree with you. But anyway, let's get to Albert Fish, because he's particularly nasty.
Is he?
Yeah, he is a particularly unpleasant character.
So before you actually watch Albert Fish, just so you know that we have a podcast, and the podcast is called I Hate This Book. And if you haven't heard it, you must go listen to this podcast. And basically, John wrote a book. Yay! That I never read. That I've never read.
Because she hates that genre.
I do. And I actually hate the book too. But since we started this, which was sort of right at the beginning of lockdown, every week you've been reading a chapter to me. It's been the highlight of my Saturdays. And every week I get to listen to the depravity of your brain.
Yep, you do.
Yeah. So this is sort of on the same vein.
Well, the reason for the Criminal Club is that through my research and looking for material and inspiration, I kind of realised that some of the true crimes out there is far more sinister than any sort of creative mind can make up. You think to yourself, is that even real? You know, this is the stuff of movies, and you know these people are real.
And do you know, there's a lot of people that love true crime.
So,
although to be fair,
join the Criminal Club.
To be fair, though, I have listened to some true crime stuff. I am a bit fascinated because I can't believe that there are. I watched the Ted Bundy film the other day.
It's quite cool.
It's not been out for. It's been out for ages.
It's worth
I've
watching.
never watched it, but yeah, I watched the Ted Bundy thing. I mean, gosh.
It's all done from the point of view of the girlfriend.
Yeah, it's a lot better because it's nothing to do with the murder.
So actually, you don't see any of the murder. Only right at the end when he owns up to her, he finally admits that he killed this one woman. But you don't see any of the murders, and all you see is the deceit from him that he lays on her and how he treats her. So it's very interesting.
Very. So yeah, definitely. I mean, I did. I have a show of my own. And we played Kiss, Marry, Snog, Avoid. Right. And Ted Bundy was actually it was my co-host. I gave her Ted Bundy.
Did she know who he was?
Yeah, she told me to watch the film.
Oh, did she?
And she, but we decided that she best marry him because he's never going to murder his wife.
Very true. But did you use Zac Efron or actually Ted Bundy?
Oh, I don't know. I just Googled Ted Bundy and got the photo. I did.
So I think he plays a good part. I think.
Yeah.
Can't really. It's actually difficult to see the difference if you actually watch Ted Bundy in court.
Well, that's the only reason why I watched I watched the film, because I realised how good looking Ted Bundy was.
Yeah, that was half of his
I
charm.
didn't know he was. I mean, this doesn't interest me. I will say none of this true crime stuff does. But, well, actually, I lie to you. It does now. But, you know, it does now. And then, so I've never really looked at who they are or what they do. But now I do.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
Should we get to it?
Do it.
So, Albert Fish, one of his MOs was he used to write letters to his victims. In fact, before he was killing, he was writing. Back in the day, women used to advertise that they were available to be married. So he would write to them as pen pals, and then he'd lure them in with these letter exchanges, and then suddenly he'd then become vile and horrific in these letters, and he'd get off on that. But
so he just write them a horrible
letter?
Yeah,
he just write them an awful letter. Yeah, he found that exciting.
What, sending it?
Well,
you wouldn't see the result.
It doesn't matter. He knew that it would have an effect. But he wrote to one of the famous killings that he did was a young girl called Grace Budd, and he actually wrote to the family about it.
After
the fact, after the killing, he wrote to them, and that was his demise actually, because they traced the stationery letter back to his hotel room and la da da da.
Okay, so I will say, criminals nowadays are a lot cleverer.
I think,
because we've been watching The Fall.
I think they have to be cleverer because of the technology. I think they're always one step ahead of the police. Albert Fish was no exception. Back in the day, he was no exception.
Well, if he wrote it from his hotel room.
It was a different police force that investigated that. So I think it was more luck than anything else. But anyway, this is the letter that he wrote.
Okay.
Dear Mrs. Budd, this is Grace Budd's mother. In 1894, a friend of mine shipped as a deckhand on the steamer Tacoma, Captain John Davis. They sailed from San Francisco to Hong Kong, China. On arriving there, he had two others, went ashore and got drunk.
Is this the actual letter?
This is the actual letter.
Right.
When they returned, the boat was gone. At the time, there was a famine in China. Meat of any kind was from $1 to $3 a pound. So great was the suffering among the poor that all children under 12 were sold to the butchers to be cut up and sold for food in order to keep the others from starving.
Really? Not really.
Yeah, really. A boy or girl under 14 was not safe.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, but why do they not do that? Why do they do it for the children and not the adults?
Why do you think?
Well, more meat.
Right, but tougher meat.
Like really tougher?
I don't know. It's easier to do children because they're in abundance.
Okay.
It's the children aren't going to make the decision. Let's start cutting up the adults. It's the adults that decide, because it's an ever decreasing circle, isn't it? At some point, they're going to be the next one on the table. So they'll choose the children always.
Bloody! I bet it was men as well.
This isn't.
It wouldn't have been a woman.
This happened in America. This happened in America.
This didn't happen in America.
It happened in America, in North Carolina, when and Maryland, when the Pilgrims first came over. They had no food, and they started eating the children. Absolutely straight up. During Elizabethan times.
I don't believe that.
During Elizabethan times, straight up, when they ran out of food, they started eating the children. Absolutely straight up. Cannibalism. If you read the Giles Milton books, and it's all reference history, they started eating their own children.
They ate their own children?
Yeah, well, any child was fair game. They were used as food for the villages that were set up.
Do you know what? I find that even worse than anything that this guy has done. I don't even know what he's done.
Yeah, but
that's like, and I'm trying to actually put myself in the position. I understand if you're hungry, but there are other ways, and they're in America. I mean, there's berries.
Yeah, but when it was winter, there's nothing.
There's animals.
It wasn't, because the Indians would, the Indians had agriculture. They would drive their animals off the land to other pastures. from where they are in Maryland, where the January, February, March, nothing grows. Where the Indians, or I think it was the Comanches that were in that area, they would go further west to where it was warmer. They'd take all their livestock with them. There was no food left for these people, so they'd have to rely on the boat coming in, which would bring more people, and then there was more fat mouths to feed.
Okay. Oof. Well, aren't you glad you live in today's society?
Completely. Anyway, here we go. A boy or girl under 14 was not safe on the street. You could go into any shop and ask for steak, chops, or stewed meat. Part of a naked body of a boy or a girl would be brought out and just what you wanted cut from it.
I don't think that's true.
Right, just listen. This is the letter, okay? A boy or girl, the grammar is also original, so it's really poor grammar. The boy or girl's behind, i.e. the buttocks, which is the sweetest part of the body, and sold as veal cutlet bought at a higher price. John stayed there, so he's written stayed wrong, for so long he acquired a taste for human flesh. On his return to New York, he stole 2 boys, one 7 and one 11, took them to his home and stripped them naked, tied them in the closet and burned everything they had on. Several times a day and night he spanked them, tortured them, to make their meat good and tender. First he killed the 11-year-old boy because he had the fattest ass, of course, and the most meat on it. Every part of his body was cooked and eaten except the head, bones and guts. He was roasted in the oven, all of his ass, boiled, broiled, fried and stewed. The little boy was next, went the same way. At the same time I was living at 409 East 100th Street. Right, can we just talk about street names in America? How the fuck do you figure that shit out? Like, seriously.
No, I don't know.
406 East 100th Street. What does that mean? What does it mean? Like, we have KOA. We have
Avenue.
Rhodesia. What's it called? That's in America, isn't it?
Yeah, that is in America.
We have
Rookery
Close.
Yeah, Fernbrook Avenue. And we have numbers like 1 to 10.
It's a lot easier.
But 409 East is the 409 is actually the number of the.
So if you imagine a square, that's what Brandon told me in terms of, if you imagine a square, a grid. So 100th Street is your longitude, and then the 409 East is, so that's also so 100th Street traverses north to south, and then 409 East, so it's an easting road. So if it's 409 West, it will be that side of 100. Oh, fuck those! I have no idea actually. It's too complicated.
Yeah, just have street names.
Anyway, he told me so often how good human flesh was, I made up my mind to taste it. On Sunday, June the 3rd, 1928, I called at you at 406 West 15th Street. Bought you pot cheese, strawberries. We had lunch, and Grace sat on my lap and kissed me. I made up my mind to eat her, on the pretense of taking her to a party. You said yes, she could go. I took her to an empty house in Westchester I had already picked out, and when we got there I told her to remain outside. She picked wild flowers. I went upstairs, stripped all my clothes off. I knew if I did not I would get blood on them. When all was ready, I went to the window and called her. I then hid in the closet until she was in the room, and when she saw me naked she began to cry and run down the stairs, and I grabbed her, and she said she would tell her mama. First I stripped her naked. How she did kick, bite and scratch. I choked her to death and cut her to small pieces so I could take my meat to my rooms, cook and eat it. How sweet and tender her little ass was roasted in the oven. It took me 9 days to eat her entire body. I did not fuck her though. I could have, and had I wished, and she died a virgin. Yours sincerely. So can you imagine receiving that letter?
I'm already grossed out by it, to be honest with you. That's like, now I have to relive that in my mind.
So receiving, as a parent myself, if one of my children had been missing, I then received that letter, is quite possibly, and this was sent to the family 6 years after Grace's disappearance. And Mrs. Budd was illiterate; she couldn't read, so it was her son had to read her this letter.
So So they caught him because obviously they remembered who had come and taken Grace to the party. Why hadn't he been questioned before?
I don't know. I'm not sure because he sort of operated statewide, so it's massive. And because he had a different name, there's no way of checking these things. His address was wrong. The only thing they had was his description. His description fitted the description from other um, killings that had happened of children, and this is where he was nicknamed the Brooklyn Vampire or the Grey Man. In some different states, he was called the Brooklyn Vampire, and in another part of the state, he was called the Grey Man, and then colloquially, it became known as the Boogeyman. And that's where parents said, if you don't come back,
The
before
boogeyman.
the Boogeyman will get you. That's who they're referring to, Albert Fish. Because if you were out late,
He'd get you.
he'd get you.
And he'd only get children.
Yeah, he only liked children because their meat was sweeter. Didn't like old people. The adults that he killed were homeless people, generally, invalids from the war.
Okay, well, so
anyway,
you've got some.
So here we go. Albert Fish is one of America's infamous serial killers of the early 19th century, and for reasons beyond just the killing of children, he ate them too. The term boogeyman relates to Fish as he became known, although confessing to over 100 children killed children.
That's crazy.
Utterly crazy, right?
Over what period?
I think he was active.
I don't understand. I think.
Siri doesn't.
I think.
I didn't understand it either.
I think he was active from his 20s, and he was 58 when he was arrested.
30 years.
So for 30 years he was active.
Gosh. Okay.
And he was married with 6 or 7 children.
Was he?
Yeah.
So he didn't eat then?
No, but they did horrible things to him. We'll get to it.
Right.
Yeah, so 100 children killed. It was the brutal killing that gripped the nation that sent Fish to Old Sparky. Was the killing of Grace Budd. That's what sent him to the electric chair. Born on the 19th of May 1870 to Randall, 75. Yes, his father was 75 years old. Can you imagine?
Oh, right. Gosh, yeah.
In 1870, his father was 75 years old and his mum was 32.
Oh my God. So that means she was 31 when they had sex. I'm sorry, but I'm just imagining having sex with a 75-year-old man.
He was not the oldest child either. He was one of the youngest children of 4 children. Youngest of 4. So his mum was...
I mean, did his mum love his dad?
There's no record of that.
When did they get married?
There's an age discrepancy of 32 years. And he was named Hamilton Howard Albert Fish and was the youngest of 4 children. After one of his brothers died, he reverted to be called Albert because the other children nicknamed him and jibed him with the name Ham and Eggs. Randall, his father, passed away when Fish was 5, so his dad was 80 when he died. And
that's long in that age, in that era.
Yeah, and his mother couldn't afford to run the house with all the children, and she made the impossible decision to place all the children in an orphanage to make ends meet. Can you imagine doing that now?
Well, no, I can't imagine doing it. But I unfortunately, we don't live in a society that. There are still people that can't afford to. Well, certainly in America. I mean, we have benefits here.
We have a decent welfare system here, don't we? Where it's sort of encouraged that the children stay with the parents. But anyway, Fish entered the St. John's Orphanage, which became the building blocks for the monster that Fish would become. Mocked and bullied, Fish realised that he enjoyed pain being inflicted on him. Instead of running away from the tormenting bullies, he embraced it, encouraged it even. And for 5 years, Fish rebounded in the orphanage, being remorselessly picked on. It wasn't until he reached the age of 10 when his mother had secured long-term employment contract that she sent for the children. Times were very different then. It was little too late. The damage was already done to Fish. He left the orphanage a damaged boy, and the early glimmers of his psychopathy were emerging.
So, was he born a psychopath?
For sure.
So he would have ended up being
incarcerated. I think, yeah.
He would have ended up being a murderer.
I think so, yeah. He was also gay, which which
Does it say he was gay?
he does have gay relations, and that's the problem back then. That was illegal. So, and that carried all sorts of shame with it as well. You know, so at 12, Fish befriended a telegraph boy. You're not going to like this bit, babes. Of a similar age. It was here that the two boys would drink each other's urine and eat the feces. We do not know where this habit comes from. The psychological term is uralgia and chorophagia. These triggers come from a place of lack and degrading. How Fisher developed this at such a young age is impossible to determine. He would sit in secret hiding places in public baths and spy on boys getting undressed. And he would answer ads in the newspapers to lonely women who were seeking marriage proposals. And he would write to them, sending them obscene letters. First drawing them into a pen pal relationship, and then send letters that were filled with vulgar content.
How old was he then? 12?
He was in his teenage years.
Oh, right.
The concept of a serial killer and the mental illness that Fish had was not understood in these times. It was still the 1800s, remember. By the age of 20, Fish was living in New York and peddling sexual tricks. It was during this time that he would seek young boys and rape them. His mother thought he should marry, and she had arranged a marriage with a girl called Anna Mary, and that gave him 6 children. Fish, I know. Yeah.
It's just like, you know, I mean, you instantly think, how do you go to bed with these people?
I don't know.
I don't think women had a choice.
It was a very different world back then.
I mean, I would have. I don't think I'd survived.
But your way of thinking would have been very different.
Well, I would have certainly. Do you know what though? There's some really cool programs on at the moment where women in that era are women of substance, as in, you know, they
real power.
They push back. I would have been one of those women that wear trousers.
Yeah. I don't think we would have ever got married.
No. Because
of that.
What? What do you mean?
Well, because we would never have been able to get married, I don't think. I think you would have, your feminist side would have been augmented because of the way the world was at the time. You'd have been beyond reproach, really. No man would have approached you.
No. Well, and also I wouldn't really wanted to have anything to do with men.
Anyway.
Okay, but I would marry you.
I know you would. Anyway, Fish tried to live a normal life. He became a painter and decorator, but this did little for his urges as a predatory sex monster, and he continued to abuse young boys, but apparently not his own children. Fish became obsessed with the dissection of the penis after visiting a wax museum, using his victims as experiments from sexual mutilation. The first documented victim was a young man called Thomas Kedden, 19. Kedden was an impressionable young man who lived in Wilmington, Delaware, who met Fish in 1910. From records, Fish forced a young man into a relationship with Fish using manipulation. The culmination of the relationship was when Fish took Kedden to an abandoned farmhouse, tied him up, and tortured the young man for 2 weeks.
These people, why would you do that? Why are you fascinated by this?
It's not just me. Lots of people are fascinated by it. I'm fascinated by the thought process, the psychopathy of it. Yeah.
Okay, but we've established that he was born this way. So, you know, I always ask the question: nature versus nurture. Is it part of you? Are you born this way, or were you made?
He was definitely born this way. There's no way.
Okay, but if there was his father died.
I don't think the orphanage helped.
No,
because I think that would have been a paedophile farm, and things like that back in those times were. And perpetrated often by the Catholic Church. I can say that, and it's an absolute fact.
Well, it is a fact, yes.
And I will say it because these people need to be held for account. I don't see how the Roman Catholic Church and the Vatican can be exonerated from that, because it's endemic throughout the faith. and the clergy within the Catholic Church throughout the world where they have abused children, and they've been allowed to do it, and it disgusts me, which is one of the reasons why I don't entertain religion, because they use that religion as a tool, as a grooming tool, and I don't like it. So yes, I can say it's the Catholic Church. Anyway, Fish wanted to cut Kedden up into smaller pieces and take him home piece by piece to what they considered, the authorities, to eat him. But the weather at the time was hot and humid. Realising the precious meat would spoil, Fish bathed the wound in peroxide, which must have been excruciating,
Yes.
and lathered Vaseline over the groin. He untied Kedden, kissed him on the lips, and gave him a $10 bill. Fish never saw him again. I shall never forget the scream or the look he gave me as I sliced his monkey off, Fish later said. Oh.
Did I miss that bit?
Well, he cut his penis off, didn't he?
What for? To eat it?
No, because he liked to dissect the penis. At 37, Anna Mary left Fish, taking all the children with her.
Wonder why that was.
And eloped with the building handyman in which they lived with. So
they lived with that?
Well, they lived in a block of flats, so the building handyman, she went off. But anyway, they took everything that Fish owned, leaving him with nothing while he was still at work. Fish returned to an empty home. Not knowing the exact timings, Mary Ann returned with the children and the empty-headed handyman in tow.
What?
It gets even more bizarre. They needed a place to stay. Like the brass balls on a monkey. They did. Little did she know at this point that Fish was a brutal sadist and had already killed. Anna Mary and the kids could stay, of course, but Straub, the handyman, had to go. It didn't take long for Fish to realise that Anna Mary was taking food to the loft where, on that discovery, Straub and Anna Mary fled, and she never saw her children again.
Oh, she left her children.
Yeah. After his wife had fled, Fish said he had auditory hallucinations. It was at this time that Fish began the process of self-harm by pushing needles into his groin, testicles and anus.
So, okay. I think okay.
He would often self-flagellate himself with a wooden paddle that had nails sticking out of it.
So how do we know this?
Well, he's been x-rayed. You can see his x-ray. He actually shorted out the electric chair.
Oh, because he left the needles.
Because all the needles were stuck in his groin.
Jesus.
So he would often use a wooden paddle on it with nails sticking out of it, and he would often ask his children to take turns to smack his buttocks until they bled.
Oh my God.
Another weird pastime was to push lighter fluid-soaked material into his anus and set a light to it. The latter was for fun. The notion of cannibalisation was becoming an escalation of his behaviour. It was an obsession.
Did they have social services back then?
Not really, no. There was nothing. He prepared entire meals where the meat was raw chicken, pork and beef, and the children forced to eat the food. This was a poor attempt to stop the urges to eat human flesh. Throughout his 30s, Fish was evaluated by psychiatric services and deemed sane. Normal, one report even stated. It was at this point he would walk around all the time carrying a meat cleaver, a handsaw and a butcher's knife in a carpet bag. Such items were on him during one psychiatric evaluation, it even made Fish chuckle to himself. One letter he sent to Estelle Wilcox, so vile was the content that when he was arrested he was detained at the local psychiatric hospital for observation, but released with a clean bill of health. The narcissist was strong in this man. The date from here is not determined, but around 1919, Fish would scour the streets for disabled men and African Americans. So this is post-war,
right.
Post-Spanish flu. So the Spanish flu is actually raging at this point. So, society was quite a very closed society. So he basically had the run of the city.
Because then they had social isolation as well, social distancing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. A demographic of society that, according to Fish, wouldn't be missed. He paid other children to help catch these unfortunate people, and then Fish would torture and murder them. There were some reports that an aging man was prowling for kids. Names to mention here.
Aging? He's only 30 something.
Yeah, but that's still aging.
Right.
Yeah, they're still aging. I remember like 30-year-olds when I was a child. They were old people. I'm 50 now.
I know, right? They were old people.
Names to mention here are Cyril Quinn, a boy that Fish would repeatedly molest for cash, and an abduction attempt on Beatrice Keel, chased off the farm property twice by the parents. So he came back a second time. At 58, the year was 1928, so he was 48 in 47,
No.
48.
Yes.
He was 58 in 2028. Edward Budd placed an ad in the local paper looking for work as his family was struggling financially. Edward wanted to take the financial burden off his father to make things easier. Fish answered the ad. He came across as normal, friendly, charming even. A respectable old man, and when Fish came to visit, he introduced himself as Frank Howard, a farmer willing to pay Edward $15 a week to help around Fish's house. Should have been your warning bells, because that's a lot of bread. $15 a week is a lot of money. The Budds thought this was a miracle. The family thought all their Christmases had come at once. Little did they know that Fish was planning to tie up Edward, mutilate him, kill, and then eat him. Fish had made plans to come and fetch Edward a week later. On the planned meet, Fish came to the Budds' home where he met little Grace Blood.
Oh.
So fascinated to the small girl, Fish immediately changed his plans. Fish, thinking quickly, thought up a story. A niece not far away was having a birthday party, and it would be amazing to take Grace with him, because Fish, this genial old man, had no malice or darkness about him. The Budds thought this was a splendid idea. Right, let's just back that truck up a minute. Some dude comes in your house, going to offer you, and he's going to take your youngest child
away
to a birthday party that's a public transport drive away.
I know, right? but now we live in we live based on old lessons, yeah.
Because of this.
So before, and also we see it on the television and we see it on the news, and we're warned not to go with strangers and not to to worry. Lock the house. Every time you go on nights, you leave the house and you don't forget to lock the door.
Lock the door, yeah.
So because we hear about these people running into our houses and killing families and stuff like that. So yeah, it's unfortunate.
Mm-hmm.
But then the society, it was quite safe. And living on a farm, you're isolated.
Bleeding.
But yeah, it's just.
Grace went with Fish happily. They never saw her again.
Oh my God.
And we know what happened to her.
So what happened to the boy that was going to go work?
Well,
he just didn't. So he said, "Oh well, actually, you have the day off. I'm just going to take this little girl."
He was going to come back. He was going to come back with the little girl and then come and take Edward home, and then that obviously he didn't come back.
Right.
On a side note, the police pursued the wrong suspect for Grace's disappearance. A police superintendent by the name of Charles Edward Pope spent over 3 months in jail before being found not guilty. The reason for this is Grace's parents had received a letter in which became the key to Fish's arrest. The letter, which is preserved in all its grammar and spelling errors, is widely distributed. 6 years after they had reported Grace missing, her father never once given up hope in finding his daughter. The letter arrived and addressed to Mrs. Budd. She was illiterate, like most people of the time. Her son had to read the letter. A letter so repugnant for a parent to receive was read by Grace's brother. The one thing that Fish failed to omit from this key piece of evidence, the envelope carried the hexagonal logo of the boarding house in which the stationery was from. The small logo had the letters NYCBA embossed into it. The letter stood for the New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association. It was discovered that after a line of questioning from the police discovered that the employee would steal the stationery and take it to his room in a boarding house. The thief had left the room, but Albert Fish was the next occupant. When the police knocked the door, Fish pulled out a switchblade, but was quickly disarmed. Like this old dude, 60-year-old with a knife, it's like quickly disarmed.
But he manages to kill people.
Kids.
Yeah.
He's like some old dude going up to a child saying, "Look at my sweets, and you want to see my puppy or whatever," and then he kills him. Francis McDonald, 9 years old. So okay, He never denied murdering Grace, but maintains he didn't take her virginity, but felt several orgasms while strangling her. Now, this is where I think the guy's a bit of a bloater, because I just can't see that actually happening. Physically, anatomically, physiologically, I don't see how that's even possible.
What, having an orgasm while you're strangling somebody?
Yeah.
Have you tried it?
No, but I don't see. It requires it requires an element of stimulation in a certain aspect of the body for a man to get to that point. But he wasn't.
But he was naked.
Yeah, but he didn't sexually assault her.
But maybe he. Oh, I see. You think he stimulated himself, then
Maybe
strangled her?
But I don't think the act of strangling caused that. I think a lot. What I've found out with a lot of research with a lot of serial killers is that you've got to take whatever they say with a pinch of salt, because they will try and blow the wind in their sails to make them sound as offensive and as shocking as possible.
Why?
Because it's part of their. This is what they enjoy: is they enjoy the killing and they enjoy the chase, but they also enjoy the interrogation. They love it because of that attention they're getting. So they'll sit and bloat their way through an interview. You know, there's one killer that I'm going to do is a guy called Richard Kaplinski. Now, when you actually read his book, you think to yourself, "My God, what an absolute psychopath!" But I sat and watched the 3 hours of interviews that he's had on camera, and I'm thinking, you're just a lying toe rag. None of what you've said is true.
Really?
And you have wasted 4 weeks of my life with your 600-page book, because it's all a load of lies. There is no doubt he was a killer, and there was no doubt that he did some of the things that he did. But the majority of the stuff he's talking about is just not possible with what he said. It was all said for effect. You could see he was lying. His whole body language was.
Who was this?
He was an assassin for the mob in New York during the 60s and 70s.
Are you doing him for the criminal code?
Yeah, Richard the Iceman Kaplinski. But anyway, so he never denied murdering Grace, but maintains that he didn't take her virginity, but several orgasms while strangling her. The known victims is Francis McDonald, 9 years old, when the young boy encountered Fish. Fish had hung him from a tree. He attempted to castrate the boy, but was disturbed by walkers and took off. The evidence to this was corroborated. This murder had remained unsolved for many years until Fish was caught. The description of the suspect was a grey old man, earning the nickname the Grey Man. The case of Billy Gaffney was difficult to comprehend. A 4-year-old was abducted and subjected to a horrendous death.
It's just so awful.
The letter is what he wrote to Billy's lawyers. I took tools, a good heavy cat o' nine tails, homemade, short handle, cut one of my belts in half, slit the halves in 6 strips about 8 inches long. I whipped his bare behind till the blood ran from his legs. I cut off his ears, nose, and slit his mouth from ear to ear, and gouged out his eyes. He was dead then. I stuck a knife in his belly and held my mouth to his body and drank his blood. His monkey and peewees were a nice little fat behind to roast in the oven and eat. I made stew out of his ears, nose, pieces of his face and belly. I put onions, carrots, turnips, celery, salt and pepper. It was all good. Then I split the cheeks of his behind open, cut off his monkeys and peewees and washed them first. I put strips of bacon on each cheek and put his behind in the oven. Hang in there. Then I picked 4 onions, and when the meat had roasted about a quarter of an hour, I poured about a pint of water over it for gravy and put in the onions. At frequent intervals, I basted his behind with a wooden spoon. So
it's like a cooking show.
Listen. So the meat would be nice and juicy. In about 2 hours, it was nice and brown, cooked through. I never ate any roast turkey that tasted half as good as his sweet, fat little behind. I ate every bit of meat in about 4 days. His monkey was as sweet as a nut, but his peewees I could not chew when I threw them in the toilet. Billy's mother demanded to see Fish. He refused to see the scorned mother. So I don't think he did half of that shit.
Why do you say that?
Because...
You don't think he did?
No, because if he had done it, he would then want to... Because his psychopathy and his narcissism, he would then want to see his mother's reaction in person. I think his mother saw through that, wanted to see Fish, and then Fish knew that he would be telling a lie. I have no doubt he killed the boy, but he didn't do half the stuff that he said in the letter. I think.
Right.
Personally speaking.
I'm just trying to think, would I want to go and see my child's killer?
I would.
You would?
Yeah.
Why?
Because I would want to see their face. I want to look into their eyes.
What if you saw nothing? If you saw no remorse?
I don't think that would bother me, but
What if you saw remorse and you felt sorry for him?
because I think you've got to. I think somewhere along the line you need to forgive, and I think if there's no remorse, you can't forgive.
I don't know though. I don't know.
You can't carry that around with you.
But a 4-year-old, like if I lost my 4-year-old, to demand to see the man, other than to go kill him myself with my bare hands. Yeah, I don't know. Brave woman.
But anyway, as a condemned man, it was his right to not see her.
But he has no rights.
Yeah, so Billy's mother maintained that Fish was not the killer. She genuinely
Oh.
believed he wasn't the killer, and Billy's killer was someone else. But the letter to the family highlighted aspects of the case that was not pertinent to the public.
Oh.
And so this is also goes. I've read something else since I've written this, is that he could have been
with somebody else,
like in a ring of people.
Oh.
The police
Why would she say he wasn't the killer?
Because receiving that letter, she just didn't believe that somebody could be so vile and horrible to a child. Fish Baby doesn't earn the right to be called the most sadistic child killer in history, and he isn't in comparison to some of the people that we'll be talking about. But there's no doubt he ranks high up in the chart. They sent him to the electric chair, where he helped the executioner put the electrodes on his body. The chair shorting out weirdly. They think because of the metal needles that Fish had inserted into his body needed a high dose of power from the electric chair, and they conducted. He told the executioner, "What a thrill that will be if I have to die in the electric chair. It will be a supreme thrill, the only one I haven't tried." Fish also said, "I also had a desire to inflict pain on others and to have others inflict pain on me. I always seemed to enjoy everything that hurt." Fish was a psychopath and coupled with a malignant narcissism. At what point do we say it's all about the orphanage? The orphanage bears some responsibilities for how Fish turned out. A complete unregulated part of the social system that was perpetrated by the clergy and the people of power, exploiting vulnerable children. Well, that's just happened everywhere. But another piece of me says Fish was born bad. It would be impossible to determine how his level of psychopathy. However, I'm convinced Fish could carry out his heinous acts because the system that wasn't in place, drifting from one place to another, preying on the young for so long because he was driven. Also, it's interesting to note that psychologists determined that Fish was in fact sane gives rise to the narcissism he showed, all in the characteristics of malignant narcissism, so his manipulation, and that wasn't really understood back then.
I think it's only just been recent that it's been, it's only a recent thing.
Yeah, since the 60s, really.
But really, it's only come into my mindset or my, world, narcissism recently. I knew what narcissist was, but, all the definitions and, all the different types of narcissism and stuff, I didn't know about all that.
Yeah. Where are we?
He was vain, egocentric.
So Fish was vain, egocentric, and had the inflated ego of himself. His pseudonyms were of people of money and power, and never of a low class. So his alter egos were always people of money. He was never a poor man. He was always a successful businessman or something like that. It always appeared that he had money. And his behaviour was by nature antisocial, even at a young age. Drinking urine and eating poo defies antisocial behaviour. His aggression was documented in his mood swings, gave rise to almost psychotic rages. And then there's the sadism that speaks for itself. I think today Fish would have spent most of his life incarcerated. There's no way his behaviour today would ever pass muster. His behaviour is because of where we are today. He is one of the thousands of killers that have been studied extensively, which brings out an understanding of how killers are made. After his death, his lawyer stated that Fish had written many notes and letters whilst he was in prison that will never see the light of day, so vile were the words and his intentions.
I mean, is it would this be a serial killer of today? Would he have been caught after
I think
the
he would have.
first
I think
murder?
I think he would have. Like, certainly by the third.
He's escalated to that.
Yeah, completely
Ugh.
evolved.
Yes, yeah, as serial killers.
To get worse and worse and worse. Like his killing really couldn't be any worse, really.
No.
And it's just, I don't think he would have survived beyond 3 or 4 killings. It's only because there was just no forensics. There was no understanding of serial killers. It wasn't even godly to be a serial killer. So that wasn't even, because a lot of our judicial system back then was faith driven. So the notion of a serial killer is not even, it doesn't even come into the psyche of thinking back then, because it was very ungodlike to behave in that way.
Yeah.
Because you commit murder, you commit it out of scorn, or you have a reason. You don't kill for no reason at all. There's no capacity to understand that back then.
I think life was very innocent.
Very.
Although there was more atrocities back then, I think. Although you say that, I mean, there's so many different atrocities nowadays. I don't know. That was that's not the first time I've heard that story. So in the criminal, but it's that was worse this time
for you,
because we've done the minisode, so I've already heard this. But well, I know, obviously blocked it down my brain. So the short story, tell me, what short story did you write?
That is basically the meeting when he goes to the Bud's house, and that meeting where he meets. So
you don't make it up then. You use a. So is the short story a fictional, or do you just use?
They use true facts and then create a fictional story based around those true facts.
So it's not completely made up.
No, not necessarily. No, not necessarily. The next. I think when I do John Wayne Gacy, the Candyman, John Wayne Gacy, the clown, I think that's kind of fictional. But even though aspects of the story is based on true events.
Okay.
So yeah. So but yeah. So if you just click the link below, you can read that short story. It only costs you $1.99.
$1.99 for the short story, but also you get the video recount and the short story book.
Yeah.
Is all of this information is part of the book as well, and there's pictures if you want to see them.
And the next one is the Candyman, Dean Call, who is, if you don't know who Dean Call is,
Google him.
Google him. Yeah, he's a pretty sick man.
Do you think you'll get into trouble for all of this research? Is it like
what?
I don't know.
I haven't done anything wrong.
No, you haven't. But you would just like blacklist you.
I don't think so.
Okay.
It's all readily available online.
All my stuff is all love and hearts. And
all pink fluffy.
Pink and fluffy.
Have a Cadbury's delight.
Thank you.
Anyway, thank you for listening and watching.
Yes,
and
I hope you enjoyed it.
Don't forget, have a listen to the podcast of I Hate This Book, which is about me reading my book, The Harvester, to Sam, my wife.
Mm-hmm,
and then, obviously, if you want to read the fictional story and read a bit more about the research about Albert Fish, which is book 1, and you get my novella short story,
Chunk,
fictional story of Chunk, which is loosely based on the serial killer Joseph Metheny. You get that for free, and then in 4 weeks' time you get the Candyman. So,
or depending on when you actually see this, it might not be Albert Fish. I'll figure it out. But either you get Albert Fish or you don't get Albert. You definitely get Chunk.
You definitely get Chunk.
Which we might probably do Chunk as a YouTube thing.
Yeah.
See you later, guys.
See you later.
Yes, and don't forget, don't judge a book by its cover.
Stay frosty.
Bye.